Buddy, Jimmy Smith. Once again, I apologize for the quality of the video. My house is being renovated, so I don't have my normal setup all the time. So anyway, I wanted to talk a little bit about my video for Ronda Rousey. Did really well on my channel. Appreciate everybody who watched and commented and everything. But one of the things that kept coming up was her abilities in the octagon. She wasn't that good. She was overrated. She was a hype train. She was exposed by fighters that were much better and blah, 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 blah. A lot of things came up. She was protected by the UFC was a theme I heard all the time. First off, everything I said was about the comments of Ronda Rousey. What she said. I didn't make a single comment about her in-octagon performance as a fighter. I didn't talk anything about that. So one of the things you have to do is you have to separate someone's personal character from their abilities in the octagon, in the ring, on the field, all right, if it's a stick and ball sport, whatever. Carlos Monzon is always my example of that. Carlos Monzon, if you're not an old school boxing fan, is widely considered the greatest middleweight of all time. Incredible fighter. I've never seen a middleweight list that put him lower than second or third. He's usually number one. I've never seen a pound for pound list that didn't put him in the top 10, usually the top 5. And he was a murderer. Killed his wife. Strangled her and threw her off a balcony. Not was suspected of. He was convicted of murder, was in prison, was on furlough, and died in a car accident. He's in the Boxing Hall of Fame. Yeah, scumbag of a human being. Terrible person. Greatest middleweight of all time. You can't, he's a terrible person. He's in the Hall of Fame. In boxing, he's absolutely incredible. Why? You separate what he did in the ring with what he did outside of the ring. Michael Nunn, another great boxer, middleweight as well, ironically, did like 20 years for trafficking. He's in the Boxing Hall of Fame. Why? He's a great middleweight. So, you can always, Ronda Rousey didn't do anything like that. There are plenty of people with awful character who are considered all-time greats in their particular sport. So there's always that separation to me between how they are as people and what they did in the octagon. A theme that I saw all the time, now that I'm digging into the nuts and bolts of her career, is people acted like she's some kind of dinosaur. That she started in the pre-tough era or something. And boy, like back in her day, she was good, but nowadays, she retired in 2016. She was a peer of a lot of fighters we consider all-time greats. The sport was very much into its modern era when she was a professional. She fought from 2010 to 2016. Jose Aldo, Anderson Silva, GSP, John Jones, every all-time great you can think of fought in that era. So it wasn't a Mark Coleman situation, Frank Shamrock. In today's MMA, those guys don't get anywhere. Mark Kerr, whatever. The OGs, Hoist Gracie, who wouldn't win an amateur fight today. No, she wasn't in that era. She was not a dinosaur. So a lot of people going, back in her day, the division wasn't very good, and I'll get to that in a second. But this idea that she's from some bygone era of the sport, Amanda Nunes, Holly Holm, Miesha Tate, we think they're all great fighters. They were all competing at that time. So I don't agree with the idea that she was from some era of MMA where her skill set was competitive and wouldn't be competitive today. I don't see her as a different era. It was a while ago, but not that long ago. I think Amanda Nunes probably comes back and becomes champion. They were peers. They were there at the same time. So there's that. I don't believe that. I don't believe she was from an era of the sport where her skill set today would not translate. I don't believe that. So when you look at her run, right, that made her famous, a lot of people point out that the 135-pound division wasn't great. It reminded me of a conversation I had with Steve Farhood, who's a brilliant boxing mind, about Mike Tyson. And I said, Mike Tyson was in an era of heavyweight that wasn't very good. The mid to late 80s were not very good. And he turned to me and he goes, the heavyweight division usually isn't very good. He said the Muhammad Ali era was great. The 90s were great. He goes, the 80s weren't very good. Yeah, Larry Holmes and Mike Tyson, that was about it. Yeah, but, it's the same thing. Post-90s was not very good. 2000s were not very good. 2010s weren't great. Started getting better in the 2010s, but he goes, the heavyweight division in the days of Joe Louis was horrible. The days of Rocky Marciano was terrible. And then all of a sudden, Ali came along and was great. But he said, the heavyweight division usually isn't very good. So you have to look at, is 35 usually very good? In her era, they were just getting it started. I did the math one time years ago for an article. And I remember it was something like the average fighter she fought had fought 2.5 fights in the UFC. They just didn't have a whole lot of fighters in the division, so it didn't take a whole lot for you to get a title shot. That was the problem, is a lot of them were kind of UFC newcomers. But my counter to that is, look at it now. 35 isn't very good now. Since from Holly Holm beating Ronda Rousey, you had Holly Holm, Miesha Tate, Amanda Nunes. Okay, great champions. Amanda Nunes ran out of people to fight, and when she retired, she left the division. Yeah, Kayla Harrison's great, but Raquel Pennington, I don't think she's a great champion. I think a prime Holly Holm probably beats her. Juliana Pena, I think a prime Holly Holm probably beats her. She beat Miesha Tate, who won the title after Ronda Rousey had beaten her twice. So the division wasn't, you could argue, great in her day, but I don't think it's great now. I think it's Kayla Harrison and kind of everybody else. So after Amanda Nunes kind of cleared everybody out, and although a lot of those people were there when Ronda Rousey was there, there's not a whole lot there at 35, which is why she was at 45 as well. So it's not one of those divisions that was usually great, and it was a down slump when she was there and she was champion. She was there when it was getting built up. It's not her fault, first off. And secondly, I don't think it's great now. I think she's very much in contention. If she were in her prime and didn't have all her neurological issues, I think she's in the mix now if she were in her prime. So the idea that it was a terrible time at 135, 35 hasn't been great since Amanda Nunes left. And I think Amanda Nunes was picking the bones of some older fighters by the end. So there's that. Also, you just can't, there's always this problem with comparing a fighter or an athlete in any sport to some future version of the sport, right? To some, well, here now would they do this? Here now would they do that? Well, she beat who was in front of her, and she beat them in dominant fashion. Only Miesha Tate made it to round number 3. That was in the rematch. Everybody else she blew out of the water. Had 3 knockouts because her stand-up sucked. Yeah, it wasn't as good as Holly Holm's. Wasn't as good as Amanda Nunes's. Those are the 2 best strikers in the history of the division. So people saying her stand-up sucks, she thought it was better than it was, for sure. And I'll get into her coaching in a second. But she had 3 wins by knockout, which is a lot for that division at that time. She wasn't bad for the people around her. It was just a matter of when she ran into really elite strikers, she didn't have, which happens a lot, she had been so dominant at her particular thing that she didn't have the toolkit to go, okay, this isn't working, have to do something else. She didn't have that. And that's the problem with her dominant success of throwing fighters and then submitting them. When that stopped working, she couldn't get her hands on Holly Holm. She didn't have that second level, third level toolkit. That is true, for sure. But it's one of the arguments you hear all the time nowadays about quarterbacks is, I'm old. I remember the 80s quite well. Quarterbacks like Dan Marino and Joe Montana, Jim Kelly. This idea that John Elway, that those quarterbacks with today's rule set, where you cannot look at a quarterback without getting a flag, God, they would have thrown for so many more yards. They existed in an era where defenses could really go after you, and they did. They got a lot of cheap shots after you threw all kinds of stuff, and those guys were beat up. What would those guys have done with today's rule set? Well, with today's rule set too, athletic, mobile quarterbacks that ran a lot weren't really a thing when I was a kid because the defenses would tear them apart. With that rule set now in the 80s, maybe one of the mobile quarterbacks of the 80s would have been some kind of legend because they would have, run for 100 yards a game and then thrown for 200. You can't compare, eras of the sport. It's not fair. And to compare, Ronda Rousey to the modern era of the sport, which I still think she's pretty good, she beat who was in front of her and she dominated them. What else do you want them to do? So the deficiencies she had, a lot of them were coaching, a lot of them were ego. And if you haven't been around an MMA team, if you haven't been, behind the scenes watching people get coached, which I have, celebrity fighters with a lot of money, a lot of cachet, whatever, they tend to start running their own camps, which is horrible. That is death almost every single time because no one's telling you what you don't want to hear. You are the golden goose. The coaches of a Ronda Rousey, a John Jones, a big pay-per-view seller, whomever, they make more money off that one person than the rest of their gym combined. They are not going to tell that fighter what they don't want to hear. And a coach, to be a coach, has to tell you what you don't want to hear. And her coaching was god-awful. Where, number one, they convinced her she was better than she was at her striking when she was losing to Holly Holm, they were telling her she was winning, which was absurd. They didn't even have basic countering instructions to the style she was facing, which is you were facing a counterpuncher, stop initiating, stop chasing her. Plant your feet and make her come to you. A lot of counter strikers, which Holly Holm was counter striking the hell out of her, don't do that. Stand in the center, make her go first. A lot of times counter strikers aren't prepared for that. Change it up. Make her initiate with the jab and see if that changes things around. Can't be doing any worse. Also, as you're chasing her, she's moving back. She's able to escape your clinch. Sit there, make her come at you. Maybe you can change the level and get a takedown. None of that. And that's basic stuff. I mean, a fan could yell that at their television set. And she didn't get that. She was too in charge of her camp. She was too, it seemed to me from the outside, willing to listen to people who just were parroting what she wanted to hear rather than give her the hard truth of you're losing this fight, you need to change something up. Not well coached, but the idea that she doesn't get credit for the dominance she had and the run she had at the time, I disagree with. Also, as a fan base, MMA fans, or combat sports fans in general, they kind of want it all when it comes to the end of a fighter's career. We want them to be dominant, then we want them to be tested, then we want them to lose, then we want them to come back and win and overcome, and then maybe retire. We kind of want this whole rocky up and down kind of thing, and life doesn't work. Wait. She got housed twice. She got beat up twice. Twice, it showed that she was not on the level of the people holding the belt. She got out. She had a great career in the WWE waiting for her. I would have done the same thing. Anyone with any brains would have done the same thing. To act as fans like she owes us a comeback to see what she could do, I don't get that at all. No fighter owes us anything, okay? They don't owe us anything. We'd like to see certain things. But she got beat up. She got solidly beat up. And after that point, I think chasing that, and a lot of fighters go out on 5 or 6 losses in a row, chasing that last win to give themselves or the fans some kind of hurrah to get behind it. She could have had that maybe against non-championship opposition. As I said, there were plenty of people, and there are people now at 135 that in her prime she could beat. I don't know how bad her neurological issues were at that point. She's complained about them a lot, where even maybe a mid-level contender could have hurt her pretty bad. She could have had a mid-level name, gotten a win, and gotten out. But you never know. And so I am not sitting here with the attitude that she should have done more because we as fans want to see her overcome. Okay, she got beat. We saw the end. We saw her peak. Anything past that I don't think is owed to us or anyone else there. But I do believe her skill set at the time puts her in her prime, which is all you really look at for me as a fighter, right? Who did you beat? How did you beat him? How long did you beat him? She had a good run. And I put her on my Mount Rushmore. I have Amanda Nunes first. I have Cyborg second. I have Valentina Shevchenko third. I'd say fourth. So she gets on my Mount Rushmore, the last spot on the right. Let me know what you think in the comment section. Not about her attitude, not about her as a person, all that stuff, because that was my previous video. What do you think of her in Octagon run? Does she make your Mount Rushmore? If so, why? If not, why? Let me know. Talk to you later.